kind of strange in college. So I don't know if you heard, she went very quickly through the bio. And so I know this is Portland, so before you get any ideas, I'm not talking about like taking drugs or something, okay? I'm actually talking about my minor. So I chose to have a minor in women's studies, gender, and health. Okay, so what that means is my classes were taught by abortion practitioners. And not just abortion practitioners. Has anyone seen the videos from the Center for Medical Progress? One of my professors was actually in those videos because she performs abortions at Planned Parenthood. One of my professors was actually called in as a plaintiff when the partial birth abortion ban was in the state and federal courts as an expert in late-term abortion. I sat through a lecture surrounded by pro-choice people when he talked about why the partial birth abortion ban is unconstitutional. Like, this was a crazy experience for me as the hyper pro-life girl, okay? What's even stranger is the reason I took these classes. I didn't want to go into the classes and take my activism and kind of stand up and shout about my pro-life view. I did plenty of that outside the classroom. I did a lot of activism with Students for Life. I decided to take these classes because I wanted to understand why people disagree with me about abortion. Like, when I was a freshman in college, I didn't really understand how someone could oppose me in something that I felt like was so obvious. So I wanted to understand where they were coming from. I asked a lot of questions, I took a lot of notes, and I listened carefully in my classes. And it was like taking a foreign language almost. If you take Spanish in school, for example, you don't just learn Spanish vocabulary and syntax, you learn about the Spanish culture. And that's what it was like for me. I learned about the feminist culture, the pro-choice culture, and the pro-choice language. So I'm coming to you today almost as someone who is like bilingual when it comes to abortion. And in combination with Equal Rights Institute and the 5,000 conversations we've had with pro-choice advocates and pro-choice people on college campuses, to bring to you 7 practical dialogue tips. So I'm on University of Michigan's campus. I'm a senior. I've been taking women's studies classes along with all my neuroscience classes, and I walk into one of my very last women's studies seminars. So this isn't a large lecture hall. This is more like 30 students in a circle discussing the literature we had assigned for class. So I walk in as a senior, I'm president of Students for Life, and I see Jessica. Jessica was the president of Students for Choice. And we make eye contact, and it is like the Wild West. When you see the two cowboys and they kind of like, okay? But instead of like putting our hands on like our guns or something, it was our phones. And I start texting my Students for Life group because all 50 of those students loved hearing stories about women's studies because they were crazy, okay? So you will never guess who's in my women's studies seminar, and they're like, you're going to be discovered, we're talking about it. And although you may not be the arch nemesis on your college campus of the opposing, Students for Choice leader, oftentimes that's what it feels like when we talk about abortion. It feels like we're two people ready to fight in the Wild West. And these practical dialogue tips today are going to help you move from the Wild West more to the coffee shop. Like you're just two friends sitting down, having coffee, and talking about something that's hard to talk about. So I'm going to bring these to you. My first one is ask good clarification questions. Okay, so what do I mean by this? We don't want to make assumptions about what the other person thinks or feels. Sometimes we kind of think about pro-choice people like robots in our head, and we have this caricature of what they think, and we don't want to tell them what they think or assume what they think. We need to ask them what they think about abortion, so we can respond to what they actually are saying, actually arguing. And so clarification questions help us to not strawman people, right? We don't want to respond to a lesser version of their real argument. Have any of you ever heard of Jordan B. Peterson? There was an interview between Jordan B. Peterson and Cathy Newman. So he's kind of known in conservative circles for, he's a professor of psychology, and he said some kind of controversial things about transgender pronouns and such. And he wrote a book, and he was being interviewed by Cathy Newman. And this interview kind of went viral online. It had something like 8 million views on YouTube. And one of the reasons it went viral is because Kathy Newman repeatedly throughout this interview says, so what you're saying is ... And every time she says this, it's so much not what he's saying. It's a complete straw man. So there's all of these like memes online and people are talking about it, whether they're like more liberal or conservative, it doesn't matter. They're like kind of laughing at how she acts in this interview. So that's what we don't want to do. If you haven't seen this interview, I totally encourage you to check it out. We certainly don't want to be like her. We want to ask clarification questions which give us more information. At the beginning of the conversation, I'm going to be asking a lot of these questions. And I want to make sure that the other person doesn't feel like it's some sort of interrogation. Okay, so I'm going to ask a question, they're going to respond, and then I'm going to slowly, respond to it. I'm going to comment on what they said. I'm going to show some of my cards so it doesn't feel like they're just on the spot and I'm like rapid firing questions at them. Okay, the second tip I have for you is find genuine common ground whenever possible. So some pro-life people make the mistake of thinking we don't have anything in common with pro-choice people. Like either you think it's okay to kill babies or you don't. And there can't be any like common ground here. But the reality is most pro-choice people want to reduce abortion. Some pro-choice people think that some abortions are so wrong, they should be against the law. Many people have a nuanced perspective, they have a lot of exceptions, and so oftentimes in the conversation it can help to lower tension, make it feel more like friends if we acknowledge the common ground. I was at Winthrop University in South Carolina, and we were set up at an outreach table as the Equal Rights Institute staff. And when we set up an outreach table, it looks something like this. So we have a question that says, should abortion remain legal here? And we have yes, it depends, and no. And we have like free speech notepads, people can write down what they think. So I'm there in front of the table, and Emily walks up. And Emily writes down yes on the notepad. That's all she writes. So I introduced myself to her, and I asked her if she would put any restrictions on abortion. And she says no, which is not something I hear a lot. Usually when I say, do you have any restrictions you'd put on abortion, they like rattle off some sort of, detail for me. And I can kind of go from there. But she says no and just kind of sits there and smiles at me. And I'm like, oh, okay, well, let me ask her another question. And as I'm thinking of another question to ask, two girls come up. And they kind of stand by the table, and one friend turns to her friend, the other, and she says, yeah, I'm really pro-choice, but I don't think abortion should be used as birth control. So I turned to Emily, and I said, did you hear what that girl just said? What do you think about that? Do you think abortion should be used as birth control? She says, oh, certainly not. I don't. I acknowledge the common ground. I agree with you. That's certainly not okay. This isn't just some light decision we can make. This is something very serious. We shouldn't be using abortion as birth control. And I said, what do you think about late-term abortion? Do you think maybe in the second trimester, third trimester, it should be illegal? She says, yeah, that makes me really uncomfortable. I definitely don't think that. So she starts listing all these restrictions as I ask her more questions. And each time she does, I acknowledge that that's something I agree with. And eventually I brought out a fetal development chart. We looked at pictures of the developing embryo and fetus. And we talked through all these different sorts of things in the conversation. And the tension went down and down and down. And eventually, by the end of the conversation, she said she thought abortion after 8 weeks for a non-serious reason would be so wrong it should be illegal. And she said, you are really making me think. I've never had a conversation like this about abortion. And she said she wanted to go and find out more, and she felt really uncomfortable calling herself pro-choice. The pro-choice person is not expecting a conversation to go that way. They're expecting us to yell at them, to be judgmental, like they don't know what to expect. In my women's studies classes, we would talk about conferences like this with the title Anti-Choice Terrorism. Sometimes pro-choice people can't really distinguish between different anti-abortion or pro-life acts. So something like you attending this conference and me giving a talk sometimes gets lumped together with things like violence against abortion clinic workers, right? Or the kind of like person out with their Bible and they're kind of pounding on it and yelling at people passing by. That's in their minds, that's the same as me doing this sort of outreach. So we do that to them sometimes and they do that to us. It's very hard because there's that cultural divide. Sometimes it's the Wild West. And so acknowledging common ground is going to help us kind of start to bridge this gap. And there's going to be less things lost in translation. They're going to stop seeing me as the president of Students for Life and start seeing me as Rachel. I'm going to see Jessica here as who she is. Okay, so my third tip is to listen to understand, not merely to refute. We do something really bad when we talk with people, and that is once they start talking, we're kind of like waiting for the time to go by until we can start talking again, right? We're not very good listeners, and we want to change this. One of the ways to change this is to silence your inner monologue. An inner monologue is kind of you talking to yourself while you're supposed to be listening. And it can sound something a little bit like this. Okay, wow, she's saying a lot of things all at once. Which one of them do I want to respond to? She just mentioned abortions in the case of poverty. Maybe I should trot out a toddler to that. Did I remember to turn on my crock pot before I left the house? Okay, Jessica really has bangs like Zooey Deschanel. Like, she looks a lot like her. You know, like these sort of passing comments in our mind, we need to silence them and pay attention to what the other person is saying. And when we do that, when they stop talking, we're not going to have a response ready. And that's okay. We can take a minute to pause and say, you just said a lot of important things. And I want to respond to them, but I don't know what I want to say yet. Let me think about it. And when you say that in the conversation, it's okay to take that break. They're going to know and appreciate that you care about what they just said. Like that's you showing them in the conversation you care. And so certainly that's not you looking like a worse pro-life advocate or something because you don't have the clever, snappy comeback. It's actually okay to do that. So to give you a little bit more of an idea of the cultural divide and just how big it is, I'm going to talk about another women's studies class where I was in one of the big lecture halls, and my professor decided to ask the class, why do you think abortion is so stigmatized? Okay, so we're going to look at some of their responses and see if it's accurate to how pro-life people think. People have different ideas of when life is considered valuable, okay? Religious values. It is a politically polarizing issue because there are intimate things leading up to abortion, like sex. The types of behaviors that lead a woman to want to end a pregnancy are looked down upon. People are afraid of women taking control of their lives. What? Okay. Because of gender roles. People debate healthcare and what government should be paying for. Clearly, a lot is getting lost in translation because I'm not arguing some of the things on here. I'm not afraid of women taking control of their lives. That's not why I'm pro-life. Because things get lost in translation, we need to rephrase what they said. Oftentimes, when we hear them say something, we need to kind of repeat back to them what we heard them say and make sure we're understanding them clearly. So I'm going to do this. I'm going to repeat back, and I'm going to take responsibility of clarity in the conversation. I'm going to put that responsibility on myself and try to make sure I'm kind of doing both of our parts. So I'll like after they're done speaking, a lot of times I'll say, okay, I'm going to say back what I heard, and if it's not correct, like I want you to tell me what I got wrong, because I want to make sure I'm understanding exactly what you're saying. In a bioethics class one time, a girl told me that she thought pro-life people wanted to punish women for having sex outside of marriage, and that's why they wanted abortion to be illegal. That's not what I'm trying to say. So I like if she would have asked me to rephrase what I said, you know, that wouldn't have gotten lost in translation. Have you ever seen someone like use Google Translate and they kind of like take one thing, they put it through Google Translate and then they put it back and it's a completely different thing. Like it's just so messed up. That's what's happening a lot of times. It's going in one ear, coming out as something different. And so, you know, pro-life person says X, pro-choice person hears Y, and vice versa. So I'm going to recommend you do this. Okay, my next one is be intentional, say what you don't mean. If we're taking on responsibility of clarity in the conversation, this is something that really good communicators do. So when you say something that could particularly be misinterpreted, you should say what you mean. Then you should clarify the part that might be confusing. You say what you don't mean, and you repeat what you actually are saying again. Sounds something like this. I do not think that dogs are people like you and I. I don't think that they deserve the same moral consideration. I'm not saying that you should go and just abuse animals and that's okay. I certainly think that's wrong. I just don't think that they're equal to us. And so they shouldn't have the same protection under the law. Or something like, I think that abortion should be illegal. And I think that oftentimes a woman, she's making a very difficult decision. But oftentimes I'm comparing women who are having abortions to women who are, I trot out a toddler, women who are killing born babies. I certainly don't think that the hearts of those women are equivalent, or the moral culpability would be the same. The kind of woman who's going to smother her 3-year-old with a pillow is certainly not in the same sort of emotional space or culpability as a woman who's had an abortion. So I'll clarify what I think about post-abortive women. That's a really big point between pro-life and pro-choice people that they misunderstand. My tip number 6 is to be intentional with your body language. So oftentimes when people aren't used to talking with pro-choice people, they sometimes get really uncomfortable and they feel very stiff or timid, or they kind of come on a little bit too strong. And we want to kind of find the happy medium there. We don't want to be, stomping around, coming at them, but we also don't want to be so meek that they can't even hear anything we're saying. We want to be confident and clear and friendly. If you can try to sit down, that's great. A lot of times, when we're at the table, I'll invite them to come sit on a bench with me or something, or go to, a sitting area where we can just be face to face. This isn't especially important if you're a really tall guy and you want to talk with pro-choice women, because sometimes as a woman, I'm trying to talk with you and I look like this. And that can be kind of intimidating. So you don't want to lord your height over us, especially if she's really angry. So body language and being, we also talk about not talking face to face, your shoulders shouldn't be squared off with the other person. You kind of want to go for a V angle where I'm discussing with you here and we're discovering truth together. If we can have that, it's going to feel less like a fight and more like we're on the same team. Because if they change their mind in the conversation, I want them to feel like they won, not like they lost. And if we're squared off, it feels like you lost if you become pro-life or something, right? Okay, so number 7, affirm their feelings. Over the last couple years, Equal Rights Institute has become more and more aware of how emotions play a role in pro-choice minds and conversations about abortion. We want people to be able to engage with us holistically. So oftentimes we'll be making really good philosophical arguments, but emotions aren't playing a role, and so sometimes you could give them a logical position and they dismiss you later for emotional reasons. We want them to feel safe, like they can engage with their emotions, especially if it's anger or compassion for women or whatever it is. I want to engage with their emotions too in the conversation so that we can kind of make everything go together. Oftentimes, pro-life people will get really defensive if the pro-choice person is kind of ranting about other pro-lifers. Because sometimes pro-choice people have encountered a pro-lifer who is a little aggressive or rude to them, and they want to bring up that experience with you, especially if you're being friendly. But oftentimes, they're just venting. They might just be ranting at you, and they're venting about their feelings. And we all find venting to be therapeutic. So it's okay to allow them to vent to you and affirm their feelings and say, I'm so sorry that that person treated you rudely. Even though we're in the pro-life tribe, and sometimes we want to be loyal to our tribe, we want to kind of protect others who agree with us, we don't need to defend the anonymous pro-lifer to the pro-choice person standing right here in front of us. We should affirm their feelings because usually they're not trying to argue for legal abortion because pro-lifers are rude. That's not what they're doing. They're not making an argument. If they are making an argument like that, you should definitely push back against it. It's absurd. But usually that's not what's happening. And so we want to help them feel emotionally safe and affirm their feelings. I'm going to talk about this story between myself, my colleague Tim. This girl here, her name is Mary, and this is James. So James was another pro-life guy who kind of had just come up to the table. We were at an outreach table. And he kind of just joined the conversation with us. Mary was a very strong pro-choice feminist. And then myself and Tim are with Equal Rights Institute. So we're kind of having this four-way conversation. And it was very awkward. And the reason it was awkward was because every time Mary tried to say something, she'd be talking, telling a story, or voicing some opinion. James would come in and interrupt her and say something totally off topic. He would respond with something about communism or just things that didn't make sense and were not related at all. It was very clear to me he didn't care what she had to say. It was also clear to her. And so Tim and I are trying to kind of salvage the conversation and listen as best we can. And, when James butts in, we're like, okay, she was in the middle of speaking. Let's let her finish before we jump in. We're trying to do damage control. And eventually Tim was able to kind of remove James from the conversation. And Mary and I kept talking. And so the minute they walk away, I say, Mary, you seem like a really nice person. And I definitely don't want to talk about people behind their back. But I'm interested in hearing what you thought about those two pro-life men. Because she's a feminist. She a lot of times in the conversation, she would say, I'm really angry about this. You guys are so nice. I don't want to be mean. I'm just so emotional about this. And she talked about her feminism a lot and how that drove her pro-choice position. And I said, as those two pro-life men were talking with us, what did you think about them? And she said, James is exactly why I need to be a pro-choice feminist. Because men like that don't care about women. I said, what do you think about Tim? Oh, he was great. Tim listened to me, and I felt like he really cared. So it's interesting because they're both pro-life, right? But she's making such a distinction in her mind. And Tim was actively working to affirm her feelings throughout the conversation. And so if you're Tim, you're much more likely to change her mind than if you're James. So we ended up having a great conversation after it was just the two of us. And it was a great experience after that, but it really helped solidify some of the things we're working on with affirming feelings. Oftentimes, pro-choice people are heavily driven by compassion, and if we can help them kind of process their compassion throughout the conversation, this can help move them from the pro-choice position. So sometimes, when we come across common ground, I'm going to ask a question about compassion. So, we'll be talking about infanticide a lot after the baby's born if a woman's killing the baby. And I might push back against our agreement with her. So if she's saying, certainly you cannot do this, I'm going to push back with some of the pro-choice rhetoric we hear about compassion. Really? You're going to tell her that she can't kill her baby? Don't you care about her? Can't we help her get out of this situation? Why is it not okay to just, use that rhetoric here, but it is with abortion? Trying to help them sort through that. And that can be really helpful. So before I open up for Q&A, I'm going to take us back to the women's studies classroom with me and Jessica. So Jessica had gone on a very long rant at the end of one of our seminars about her communications classes. So in her communications classes, she was having to read a lot of papers by conservative writers and Republicans, okay? So this is not women's studies, we did not read those papers. And so she goes on this rant at the end of women's studies about how Republicans are evil, and she's so sick of being forced to encounter all these ideas she disagrees with so strongly. She talked about how she was disgusted by them, and she talked about how frustrating it was to go through that experience. And so I'm sitting there in this women's studies class thinking, gee, take a walk in my shoes. This is what I go through every day. But I tried listening as best I could. And because it was the end of class, I didn't get to ask her a question or anything. We didn't discuss it. Class just ended. And I was like, what a great note. But the next week, I decided that I wanted to try to talk to Jessica about that. And so, the first couple classes we had, there'd been the animosity there. It was a little awkward. And I knew that. I knew that she didn't like me. And but I was very set on this. I wanted to kind of push her out of her confirmation bias Confirmation bias is when you want to like kind of close yourself off to people who disagree with you. You want to stay in the echo chamber. And so I wanted to challenge her on that because, you know, she definitely wanted to be an open-minded person. So the beginning of the next class, I decided to go up and sit right next to her before class started. And here's how I didn't walk up, okay? Really timid, right? I also didn't stomp over and like confront her and sit down and we're gonna have a conversation. I was intentional about my body language. Whoops, it's not going. But I was intentional about using my body language. I tried to appear relaxed. I tried to appear friendly. I sat down, I asked her, you know, some small talk about an upcoming paper. And then I started with a clarification question. So I said, Jessica, at the end of last class, you said a lot of things that I found very interesting, and I want to know what you have to say about it a little bit more because I want to make sure I'm understanding what you were saying. Here's what I heard you say. So I'm rephrasing what I heard her say. Rephrase what they said. I heard you say that Republicans are evil and that you find it really frustrating to be in a class where you're forced to read conservative writers. So I'm affirming her feelings a little bit by saying, sometimes I get really frustrated too. Like when I have to encounter ideas I disagree with, it makes me uncomfortable. Sometimes it makes me angry because they say something I think is outrageous, but I push myself to do that anyway. So can you clarify a little bit what you meant by that? Did you mean that Republicans are evil, or is that just something you were saying because you were venting and, you know, sometimes we say things we don't mean? And she said, yeah, Rachel, I don't really think that. I was upset. And I'm really glad you asked me about it. And she said, you know, I do get frustrated, but I think it's a good thing to struggle with others' ideas because it helps us learn. And like diversity of thought is a good thing, and it can help us really, you know, find like better solutions to things and such. So I'm listening to understand. Even though like I hear her saying something completely different than she did in her rant, I'm not like saying, no, I heard you say this. I'm not like fighting with her. I'm allowing her to kind of save face a bit. And so, you know, I'm hearing her out and I'm trying to find common ground with it. And, you know, it's very obvious, like we're sitting in women's studies. She knows I'm the president of Students for Life. And, you know, we kind of have a great discussion about this intellectual honesty of engaging with difficult things. And this was the turning point in in our relationship as just acquaintances. It kind of went from like being the arch nemesis to just being two people. And I really felt like there was a mutual respect that we had because of that 10-minute conversation before class. Ironically, in that class, my professor brought to the, you know, attention of the students that whenever we talked about abortion, no one wanted to bring up pro-life ideas. Shock, because like everyone is so strongly pro-choice. And people didn't even want to like question things. They didn't want to like actually critically think about the material because it was such a vacuum of everyone agreeing with each other. So my professor was like, we need to have better discussions. We need to bring in outside ideas. Without everyone assuming that we subscribe to that idea. Because like you could just bring up an idea without thinking that thing. And Jessica talked next. And she said, you know, Rachel has a point. And oftentimes when we talk about pro-life ideas at all, we use the term devil's advocate. And that's not really fair because we don't think they're like evil. And I couldn't believe that she like kind of came to my defense. Now, everyone else in the classroom, they didn't really know I was pro-life, right? I was just sitting there asking questions and contributing like all the others. But she was the only one that really knew. And in that class, they had brought up Students for Life. Like one girl said, oh yeah, I went on their website. They're definitely against abortion. And I was like, yeah, that's the whole point. But Jessica even saying like, let's not use the term devil's advocate. Let's just recognize that they're people with other perspectives and try to like think through our view better. Really meant a lot to me. And I don't think that that conversation before class would have gone as well if I didn't use dialogue tips like this. At Equal Rights Institute, we teach a lot more dialogue tips than I was able to talk about today. We have an online course in apologetics, but also kind of the conversational tactics. So things like I talked about today, and much more. So if you're interested at all, I will be out at my booth across from registration, and you can ask me questions about the Equip for Life course if you'd like, or you can even sign up today. I'm offering 10% off. So if you're interested, there's about 4 hours of video, and right now about 40 hours of podcasts. We release another one every other week. You get access to group activities, to our forum where you can ask us questions. Oftentimes we work with groups, so if you know a Students for Life group, for example, you can get it for 20 people for about $200. So that's for a whole year, $10 a person. They can take the course, they can get equipped, and they can do outreach. They can have better conversations on their college campuses. And so you're welcome to follow us on online, and I'm just going to open up for any questions. We're not going to do note cards or anything, so feel free if you have anything you want to clarify or related. Thank you. That's a really good question. So just a little bit more on my personal background and how I was able to kind of go into the women's studies stuff. So I was raised Catholic. I am Catholic still. And I was raised in a very pro-life home. I'm actually originally from Owasso, Michigan. And my first encounter with the pro-life movement, I was quite young. It was even before I started school. I was 4 years old. I'm like peering out like the back seat of the car. And there was a man in Owasso, Michigan. His name was Mr. Poulian. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit more about him, and you might have heard about him on national news, but he would like stand on the corner by the library with a sign that says "Choose Life," and it would have like a smiling baby. And I was like, why is that guy out there with a baby on his sign, to my mom. And she gave me like a kind of a short explanation of what like the pro-life movement was. She's like, people are hurting babies. He's trying to stop that. And I was like, I want to stop that too, but I was just like a little stickler. And then fast forward to me being a freshman in high school. It was about homecoming time. And we're all filing into school, and I remember like they had homecoming signs kind of like in the yard, for the football game. They had like the football players and stuff. And Mr. Poulian was like out across from the high school. And that morning, and Owasso is a small town. This isn't like Detroit, Michigan. It really was a pretty safe place. But that morning, he was actually shot through his sign and died. And that was really scary for me as a pro-life person. And my dad was really friendly with him. I didn't know him that well, but there were like lots of confusing questions about what his motivations were that day, because he had actually killed another person that same day. But that was really scary for me. And I didn't really encounter a lot of pro-choice people because I didn't talk about my pro-life views. I was very angry, and I had a lot of, feelings. I wanted to do something, but I didn't know what to do. I did like the Right to Life pictures and oratory contest and stuff like that, but not a lot of interaction with pro-choice people. And so in my mind, pro-choice people were scary and mean. Like I was on Facebook, and that was my first conversation, I think, with a pro-choice person, and it was not pleasant. They were very rude and they were very cruel. And so I didn't get it. And then I go to the University of Michigan. I'm a freshman headed to class, and I see a commotion on like the central part of campus. And there's one group out there, and they have a bunch of Planned Parenthood signs, and they're like passing out information. And then there's another group, and they have a bunch of like makeshift poster boards that say "My Body, My Choice," and like I stand with Planned Parenthood. And I'm like really confused. I'm like, why are people protesting Planned Parenthood? And then I realized that was the pro-life group. It's actually Students for Life and Students for Choice. And I saw them, and this is so symbolic of what I think the issue is right now, is that the pro-life people are like passing out their flyers, and they're talking to people passing by. And the pro-choice people are like trying to pass out information and talking to people passing by, but they're not engaging with each other. And I thought that was so weird. Soon afterwards, I got involved with Students for Life, and I started actually having in-person conversations through our activism. And I was like on the leadership board right away. But anyway, And honestly, it felt like a personal call to take the women's studies classes. And so I just kind of dove right in. I didn't know to expect. I was like, maybe I'll kind of make some friends that are very different than me and kind of get outside my bubble and learn something. And I certainly got more than I expected. So it wasn't like some, planned out undercover thing. Like sometimes I try to use, I don't like the word undercover. I really wasn't. But I kept it kind of like a low profile because I didn't want to skew the way people like were talking in the room. When you're in a room of 30 people and they all assume you're pro-choice because you're in the class, and you start talking, oh, I'm pro-life, it just changes the dynamic. And I wanted to be immersed in the culture and kind of study like a little bit separated, but right there. So that's the long answer to your short question. Any other questions? Yeah.
And how did you find Equal Rights Institute?
Mm-hmm. So we first encountered Equal Rights Institute. So I was a junior, vice president of my Students for Life group. And I think we had gone on the March for Life, and we went to the Students Life of America conference. My now boss, Josh Brahm, was speaking there. And I wasn't with them on that trip. I really wanted to go, but my brother was getting married the same weekend. Ugh. Anyway, so I didn't see Josh speak, but like everyone comes back from the conference in our club, and they were like, "We are bringing Equal Rights Institute to our campus," and I'm like, "Who are they? I don't care." But I did. Once I learned who they were, I was so excited, and I ended up getting like put in charge of the event, which was, I was the only one who didn't know anything about it. And we brought them to our campus. And the old way of us training college students was we would host a 8-hour-long seminar on a Saturday, and the students would have to drink from a fire hydrant. That was me. I was sitting there and like apologetics and philosophy and all the dialogue tips and how to respond graciously to the case of rape and like everything that Equal Rights Institute had to offer crammed into the 8 hours. So we sat there, and then we did outreach with them for 2 days on campus, and I fell in love with it. I remember walking away, and I know I'm like biased now that I work for ERI, but as a student, I remember walking away from that seminar and I was like, every college student needs this. I really felt that way because I had been talking with pro-choice people. I'd been in the women's studies classes. I was a junior at this point, and I had some good conversations, but when I did outreach with them after learning what they taught, everything changed. So I certainly appreciated it, and long story short, I ended up working for them. So that's how we first encountered them. But now students don't have to drink from a fire hydrant. That's why they developed the course, so they can watch it online at their own pace. Okay, so what would I say to a woman who's in crisis, who is considering abortion? I know it's wrong. God will forgive me. What would I say to help her? So I'm not an expert on like sidewalk advocacy. I worked at the pregnancy medical center for a little while, and I've done some sidewalk advocacy outside abortion facilities. And at the pregnancy medical center, like I helped, clients coming in who were pregnant. But what I would say, after talking and listening to my colleague Jacob, who does this way more than I, he specializes in this. We're actually like adding a bunch to the course from him because he's done this every Friday for hours and had all these babies saved. We need to talk about her situation. So I'm going to ask her questions about what's going on for her. Why does she feel like she needs the abortion right now? And how can we give her a hand up? How can we help you to not have to do this, Because it is true. Even pro-life people, Christians, are having abortions. An outstanding number of them, too. Like, a lot of times we underestimate that. This is a real problem. It's not just, like, the first time teenager, she's super pro-choice, she's an atheist. It's like, it's just not just them, it's all of us are experiencing this in our lives. So I'm going to talk to her about her situation, what's going on. Like if I'm outside in front of the abortion facility, I'm going to be talking with her and what do we need to do for you to come with me to the Pregnancy Resource Center? What do we need to do to help you not have to go through with this? And so, if she's saying God will forgive me, I'm probably going to talk with her about her faith and see what she's going through too, because we know that there's a lot of nuances to that and what's going on for her, but want to make sure that she's being consistent in what she believes in too, because that seems like a very strange inconsistency to go through too. Right. So do you mean as a family? Like kind of how do we approach this? Maybe it's your grandchildren or something. Is that kind of what you're asking? That's tricky because as grandma trying to talk to your, granddaughter or something, that can be hard because oftentimes like there's a kind of a gap there. And family dynamics add a tricky, like, I don't know, it's just so much more strange, but I would make sure they understand why you're pro-life. Because oftentimes I think as like pro-life families, we can try to bring them with us to things, but if they're really like opposed to it, Grandma, you just don't understand, like what's going on. I would walk through it with them a little bit. I think sometimes we think we're educating our children or grandchildren about this issue, but we're really not. And like listen to hear what they think. So tell me why you're pro-choice. What's important about it to you? Why do you disagree with me? And like, you could even try pretend you're not talking to grandma right now. Like, talk to me as your friend. Because sometimes it can be a little weird where, like you respect the authority of your parent or something. But I think trying to equip the younger generation with the right tools and resources so that they're not sitting in that place that I was, where I was like, I don't know what to do. I have all this energy. I don't know where to put it. Helping connect and support things like Students for Life, and get people involved so that their peers can be reaching out to them. We can create a culture of people that know what to do. Where does prayer play a role? I think it plays a really big role. Oftentimes in the kind of work I do, I think it happens behind the scenes. If you're interested in joining our prayer ministry, I'd be happy to add you to it. We have a lot of people who are kind of working there. I think prayer certainly happens behind the scenes a lot. Many times when I'm making arguments, they are secular. And the reason for that is I think you can make an argument that's secular with, an atheist, and it's going to be persuasive to them, and a Christian, because we're using science and philosophy. So it's kind of a very widespread, big umbrella that kind of encompasses it all. Certainly for me as a Christian, prayer is everything in the ministry I do. But I don't bring up religion all the time in my conversations. And I think pro-life people are definitely divided on this. Like, if you're not sharing the gospel, you're doing something wrong. Or if your only objective is to share the gospel, you're doing something wrong. Like, you can't win. And everyone has their own kind of perspective on that. But I certainly, it plays a big role for me behind the scenes. So thank you so much. I don't have any more time to take questions right now, but I will be at the booth. So if you have anything you want to ask, I'll be there. Thank you.